however we want to talk about artificial intelligence, it also comes with a very human puzzle of unknowns, innovations, and certainly some fears. The panel that's going to take the stage right now is going to help us sort a lot of this out in terms of the impact on AI, on of course, company transformation, but also as it relates to ethics and compliance considerations that come with it. So please welcome our panel representing Intel, Microsoft, GE, and joined by our colleague at Ethisphere, Michael Byrne. Thank you.
So my name is Michael Byrne. I'm with Ethisphere. My goal is to just have a conversation. We have incredible expertise up here. About 25 minutes in, we're going to open the floor to some questions because I think this is a topic, so artificial intelligence, we'll start by just level setting. What does it mean? I think the minimum goal from our conversation, I think we're going to far exceed this, is when the business owners in your company come and ask you why you're not using it, if you're using it, you can have an intelligent and informed answer as to what does it mean. And I think people are using that term in a lot of different ways, and we have folks up here that are all doing it differently. And so with that, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce everybody and have them briefly introduce themselves, and then discuss, if you will, where you are and where your company is and what your role is on this journey using what people are calling artificial intelligence. And so we've got Dave Heiner from Microsoft, Al Rosa from GE, and Gail Shepard next to me from Intel. So Dave, if we could just start down there with you, please.
Sure. And thanks very much for the invitation to be here today. My name's Dave Heiner. I'm a strategic policy advisor at Microsoft. I'm focusing most of my time on technology policy issues relating to artificial intelligence and working on some special projects as well. I've been with the company for about 20 years in a variety of roles, 25 years. Most of that time as a vice president and deputy general counsel. I led our competition law practice for many years. Got in on that when it was kind of a growth industry in the mid-90s, when the company was under intense scrutiny in DC and then later in Brussels. And more recently, I was leading our regulatory affairs team. So this is a group dealing with privacy law, telecommunications law, accessibility, and some of the policy issues relating to the growth of the internet.
Great to be with you again. I know many faces in the room. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer for General Electric, and I love doing these sessions, mainly being a listener rather than talking, because I think integrity fundamentally is a team sport, and it's something that we can benefit from by coming together. There's not a lot of us out there, and so we have to work together to find out what's really effective. And so I'm hoping today's panel will help to start to reveal this critical area for those of us in the room. We'll share what we know, and I'm hoping that you guys will ask questions, because that's going to be the most interesting and useful way to unlock the information. So looking forward to the discussion.
And Gail.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Gail Shepard. I am from Intel. I have been with Intel for about 2.5 years. I came up through the enterprise software industry. I'm actually responsible for an organization inside Intel that develops AI applications for decision support for enterprises, financial services, manufacturing, complex manufacturing, environments, defense, and healthcare. So my daily role is really leading a team that thinks about how we can help workers get their jobs done more effectively, more efficiently, with better decisions, more consistent, better decisions, and to do that with AI-enabled applications that are not only using current and the most advanced available today in terms of reasoning systems for supporting decision-making, but also have explainability and transparency in them, embedded within them, such that we can explain how the algorithms work. We can explain the data that was used to make the decision, from end to end. So my my journey as part of Intel, of course, is that we are part of an AI portfolio that Intel has been assembling through its Intel Capital organization, which invests in AI businesses, from decision systems to data content and data wrangling, to a portfolio of technologies that we've acquired from Mobileye, which is an automotive-specific vision cognition system, to Movidius, which also does deep learning and visual cognition, to Nirvana, which is really emboldened to develop and deploy both software and hardware platforms for deep learning. So we are part of that portfolio. And so what that does is really have us focus on a daily basis. A lot of people at Intel focus on ethics and AI, privacy and security of data. So it is a serious and important topic for us. And I'm happy to be here today to represent Intel and to have this conversation. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So I think we need to level set at the beginning. What do we mean by artificial intelligence? And each of you is interacting with it in a slightly different way. And some of the terms that we hear are machine learning. I think I heard cognitive. There was a phrase with cognitive learning in there as well. And then there's digitization, right? And Gail, could you kind of break it down for the, let's call it the beginner out there?
I'll do my best.
All right,
okay.
Thanks.
So first of all, industry has been using machine learning for decades. Machine learning is not new. Machine learning is traditional machine learning uses the fundamentals of statistics to predict what's going to happen next, what one should do next, what's going to fail, what's going to work, what is a suspicious activity, what looks like a fraudulent activity, et cetera. The problem with traditional machine learning is it is a black box, and it is not adaptive, and it doesn't learn in real time. So new AI, really the transformation to AI, has required a couple of things. One is data. So the big data transformation, digital transformation, all of you have been undergoing is part of the enablement of getting to AI. Two are compute power, of course, and Intel's front and center in that journey and enabling it every day. And then third would be more sophisticated algorithms or more sophisticated learning. So when we break that down into what is AI, therefore, we think of it, I think of it as an OODA loop, if you're familiar with that concept. And if we add an L onto that, an OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, and learn. These are traits that we have every day in everything that we do. Sitting on this stage looking at you looking back at us, you're automatically going through OODA loops. And so the ability for you to do that is a combination of stable, known information that you have, as well as ingesting in real time new information and developing potentially a new hypothesis, understanding a new scenario, learning from that, and capturing that information in your memory. That's a full learning cycle, a full reasoning cycle that we go through. And statistical machine learning capabilities don't do that today. AI is where we think that empowers that whole reasoning cycle, learning and reasoning and feedback loop cycle that ultimately we want in our systems. So as we think about human-machine interaction, human-machine dialogues and collaboration, that truly is the future of AI as we think about it in the enterprise. And it's not a long-term future, it's a near-term future where I believe our applications will not only help you make better decisions, but actually will collaborate with you. If you're investigating a suspicious activity, why can't we direct via dialogue and speech the machine to go work for us, to use this thought process, use this reasoning idea to go investigate this and let me know what you find. And while the machine's doing that for us, bring us back some new ideas that they found along the way, some new patterns, anomalies, or a novelty that might be interesting to us. That's the future of AI, not available today. But all of that, regardless of what we do with AI, requires explainability and transparency. We need to have trustworthiness in the systems that we build. And all of us who are building systems and delivering them into the market have to have this fundamental capability of explaining what we're doing, giving you the transparency to see how it's done, and then ultimately building the trust. Just as we have trust in payroll systems today, how many people check their paycheck every time they get one, right? It's automatically deposited. You assume it's going to show up with the right tax calculations, et cetera. Well, when that first happened, when payroll systems were first automated, I suspect everyone was, I wasn't there, but I suspect they were out calculating, is that right? We don't do that today. We have total trustworthiness with our payroll systems. And ultimately, we'll get there. We have a long way to go yet.
And we're definitely going to dig into the morality or ethics behind AI and making sure that we get good output. But we'll come back to that. Al, I know, and you've been talking about it for a long time, and it's a passion of yours, digitalization and what you're doing at GE, and GE is such a large enterprise. Could you explain what you've been doing?
Well, look, I come at this from three contexts that I think it's universal, frankly, around the room, no matter what company you work at and no matter what the size of the company. For me, all compliance, all integrity comes back to culture. Culture is the primary influence on behavior. And so when I think about AI or any other tool or strategy, that's really the prism, the first prism through which I'm evaluating the question or the problem statement. Integrity is about human behavior. What causes an employee to act, and what action influences their rational self-interest, and what it is that they think benefits them, causes them to progress in their career, to stay out of trouble, or what have you. The second context for me is that, and the reason really why I love this conference, is that compliance is a new profession. When I compare what I do every day to that of my colleagues in legal at GE, I recognize that the legal function is decades old, a century old, whereas compliance in its current state is probably anywhere from 10 to 15 years old. And for that reason, we haven't yet settled on the exact things that are effective within our respective environments. I think we're still, as a profession, very much in a learning mode. And third, I question, frankly, whether some of the tried and true practices that we all participate in, all of us in this room, are truly effective in the way that we need to be. So let's take an example. Online training. There's probably not a compliance person in the room who hasn't assigned an online training. And if we're honest with ourselves, me included, some of us have done this in the old sheep dip fashion, right? Everyone gets everything because if you have 10,000 people, it's going to be hard to reach them on an online setting. It's hard to figure out from the HR system who's doing what band levels they are, what seniority, what job function. And if you're just one person, you might be tempted to assign a broad-based training. The second thing we have to recognize is that the employees who get that training forget it not in a matter of days, but in a matter of hours. And part of that is this human behavior dynamic that I've talked about. I think it comes down to respect, right? The employee wants to know that the thing that they're getting is relevant for them, to their job function, to their title, to the problems that they'll face. So when I started to think about digitizing the compliance program at GE, this is the perspective that I took. And my team and I, we started to settle on starting to try to make the program more effective in critical ways. In this area of training, we settled on a concept that we're calling the P&L of one, which is to create a digital twin of each employee so that we can provide training materials that are relevant and timely. Now, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to accomplish here, let me give you an insight that we came across that confirms this suspicion, this belief that what we're doing as a profession is perhaps not as effective as it needs to be. So what we did is we plotted all of the training that we'd given to a group of about 1,000 employees. And we plotted that visually so you could see for each employee when along a timeline they had received a training. And that was represented, let's say, by a circle. Then we plotted, based on our investigation data, our open reporting data, our program monitoring data, when there was a defect in that program with respect to that employee. Let's say an employee had mistakenly engaged in the hiring of a relative of a government official while there was a deal pending, let's say, and had not followed the compliance process. We also plotted that defect, if you will, that compliance miss, against that timeline. And you won't be surprised by what we found, but it was still eye-opening for us, which is that there was a mismatch between the timing of the training. It was either too early or too late. Maybe the employee had the miss and they encountered the issue and they got training 3 months later. Well, that doesn't do them any good. It might feel good to us because we've ticked the box, right? But the program isn't more effective. And the work that it took to assign that training that was 3 months late is huge. It was a lot of money, it was a lot of time. So what we're trying to do is use data analytics to narrow in the scope. We pooled our data with respect to our online systems, and we're trying to isolate that unique identifier for that employee, which shows that the activities are out of normal and that therefore require a prompt, which educates them that, hey, you are about to encounter an issue for which you need to take some action. Remind yourself of the data, call Al, right? Call your compliance leader. That replaces, in the ideal world, the boring, online, ineffective training, but it's more effective, and it allows us to have a touch point with the employee that builds respect, us for them and them for us. I think if we extrapolate across all of the program elements that all of us do in a given month or week, if you take risk assessment, training, communications, policy implementation, program integration, we can all agree that each of those things can be developed in a better, more effective way than they are today. But they have to be things that are force multipliers that help the single compliance officer in her office be able to connect meaningfully with an employee. The last thing I would say is that one thing we can all do together is work together, I think, more effectively to bring this about. It's a lot of money to develop these strategies, and it takes a lot of time to develop them. But working together, we could affect a change in this space by determining what works, investing in common, and then sharing outcomes more so than we do today, so that there's not a leader who's entrepreneurial, but she's out there on her own, just having spent a lot of her budget and time and also capital internally on a false start. So,
Thank
thanks.
you. And I'm going to go to Dave, and then I'm going to come back to you, Gail. Dave, in your role as a strategic policy advisor, and we're going to come back to Gail to talk about a specific product that Intel has, but since you're a policy advisor, how blurred are the lines right now when it comes to development of artificial intelligence versus policy? And what do you think the main concerns that society should have are?
Well, we're very much working to bring together the policy focus at Microsoft with the engineering focus. And that's because, as sort of Gail's answer was driving at, we really think that AI is going to be one of the most consequential technologies of all time, right up there with the Gutenberg printing press, electricity, the microprocessor. And the reason for that is that AI systems, we put the emphasis is on the word, the I, the intelligence. It can help advance human intelligence by taking advantage of the capabilities of what's really computational intelligence, machines, to help us make better decisions. Al was talking about making better decisions in the context of compliance, directly relevant to this conference. But as Gail was saying, sort of like decisions in any aspect of life, how to maximize sales, or who to readmit to the hospital when, or what medication to give, or how much of a fertilizer to put on a field, any kind of a decision. We're not that good as people at making decisions, right? We have all kinds of biases, and I'm not talking about just the kind that came up in the diversity and inclusion section of the day this morning, but broader concepts like, we put too much focus on what happened yesterday compared to what happened a month ago, or too much focus on what will happen tomorrow as compared to a week from now. And machines don't have those kinds of biases. So we think that AI technology will be incredibly consequential And like other consequential technologies, it will raise new societal issues. And Gail touched on some of them, like the question of what are these systems really doing, right? The transparency of the systems or the explainability. Another is the fairness of these systems. Will they be fair or not? And we begin with human decision making, which isn't fair in the first place. There's a set of privacy concerns, because again, as Gail was saying, it all depends upon data. And if we're making decisions about people, we need data about people. And so there's a whole set of privacy concerns. There's a set of security concerns. Jonathan Haidt was talking about, Russian bots infiltrating Facebook. But imagine if bad actors infiltrated the training data for an AI system and thereby, affected the outcome of it. There are concerns around the inclusiveness of these systems. There's concerns around the reliability and safety of the systems. And then finally, accountability. Because you'll have, a chip made by Intel, which might be optimized in some way for AI, and some software from Microsoft, which gets implemented by a third party, and then put in some other product, and then something goes wrong. Who's accountable? So these are all the sorts of questions we need to work through. And at Microsoft, we're kind of at the early stages, right? This AI thing has really just taken off in the past year or two. And so we're really trying to get our arms around what are the issues and working with our engineers, what kinds of best practices can we put in place to really guide them in their development of the technology.
Thank you. And we're definitely going to dig more deeply into some of the ethical and moral concerns. Before we get to that, Gail, getting more specific into what Intel is doing in this space, because you both are using it as a company, the technology, and you're also out there with a product, an AML product. And I was hoping that you could maybe, if I were in the audience, I would want to know why this affects me and how I can benefit from it. And so giving a concrete example of what Intel is doing with AML, do you mind walking us through that a little bit?
Great, thank you. So thank you, David, for your comments, because I think it's one of the most important topics associated with AI today.
Yeah.
Right? So I spend my time, literally we, as my team, and I spend our time thinking about how we can improve decision making. But some of the specific areas that we're working on are AML, specifically not detection, but the idea of the high number of false positives that are generated through the detection systems, because they are model-based, they are rule-driven, and therefore not as adaptive. So how do we help? How do we help the investigators? How do we help reduce the amount of time spent on the wrong investigators or evaluating the wrong things and focus on the right things for people? So that's one thing I'll talk about. The second one is inside Intel. Intel uses our technology along with its other technologies, deep learning technologies, to create operational efficiencies, operational excellence. And Intel has a very large team focused on a variety of compliance and supply chain activities, and any business as large as ours, you're going to find an opportunity to investigate something, right? And so one of the things that we're working on, and one of the reasons I'm here today is a gentleman from our compliance, our senior counsel from our compliance organization, and Saffron are working together to determine how to apply Saffron into the areas of fraud, waste, and abuse, or supply chain intelligence and fraud. And so there's some opportunities inside corporations to deploy this technology in addition to banking and financial institutions. So that would be a second use case. And the third, generally we're helping in issues and defects resolution and identify causal relationships, which takes me back to anti-money laundering. So anti-money laundering, as I mentioned, is something that we're focused in on because there's a mission here. And as I spent the first decade of my life at Saffron as an investor and someone working side by side with founders, mostly in the defense and aerospace industries. And in defense, we worked primarily in counterterrorism. And our mission there was to connect the dots between people, places, things, organizations, events, outcomes, to determine where bad actors were, how to identify bad actors. And so one of the things that I would learn during that time would be how much money is filtered through our systems that actually fund terrorism, weapons trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking. So money laundering becomes a center for that type of activity. And so on mission is to help reduce that. The way to help reduce that that we have identified is to help the financial institutions, one, reduce the number of false positives. Well, we're not in the detection systems themselves, so we're an add-in that analyzes the outcomes from the detection systems so that we can quickly identify anomaly and novelty in the suspicious activity against former behaviors, like our experience, if you will. We can rank order that very quickly for what to focus on first. We can do peer review, lose my mic, excuse me. We can do peer review analysis, similarity analysis, peer review analysis using a nearest neighbor concept that quickly lets us see what's different about this particular individual or transaction from others. And so these types of things are designed to give the investigator more oomph, more investigative power, if you will, and insight into what's actually in this data, such that when the human investigator, makes a decision to act on that suspicious activity, it has the highest degree of accuracy it could have at that moment in time. The other thing that we're doing is providing the drill down, if you will, to the evidence behind our findings so that they have more confidence also as to what they're identifying and what they're ultimately recommending for next action. So that's an OODA loop for suspicious activities that are identified through detection systems. We think of ourselves as the red team, right? The red team augmenting the human team to drive up a higher degree of accuracy. We apply that kind of thinking in almost everything we do. We reason by analogy as humans. Gee, you remind me of, that situation, I've seen that before, and you can anticipate almost what's going to happen next by your experience. And so the Saffron capability that we've added into the Intel AI portfolio is really a reasoning system that takes learning from all kinds of systems, all types of learning, machine learning, deep learning, cognitive vision, to basically form a persistent memory such that you can reason from this knowledge memory to derive next best actions and make have situational understanding, at least, of some patterns that are forming in front of you. So that's our contribution to the AML activity specifically. We take that further. We'll take that further into probably some other areas like fraud. We've done some proofs of concept in fraud, applying similar ideas to fraud, and insurance fraud being one of those in particular. That's very interesting and complex. And so we're on the beginning of this journey for helping the financial institutions with financial crimes. But I think it's a very exciting time, and certainly this is the tip of the spear of what's possible.
Thank you. Al, I have a follow-up question for you, just in terms of practicality, right? Getting into it, and then we're going to get into it. We'll open the floor to some questions and then talk about the ethics surrounding all of this. Do you have any ways, any advice for the people in the room as to what kind of data points, how you can connect the dots within your data, kind of that can serve as bridge building? I view it as the first thing is to get the data, to figure out how to get the data in a format that a machine can use it, digitization, and you're really looking at connecting the data to predict things or occurrences. And then the next level, it seems to me like that the machine is actually helping teach itself. That's kind of what she's talking about with Intel. Do you have anything, kind of the first step? Do you have any advice for people on how to connect the data?
It's extremely difficult. This is the hardest part of the process, at least it has been at GE. We have more than 100 so-called ERPs, or systems in which the employee data resides, and they don't talk to each other, so you have to aggregate the data into a lake, and then when you go to analyze, you'll find that the data many times has been miscoded or is absent in key fields, and so the results that you get are not completely dependable. So for us, it's been about starting small. We started our effort with just 500 employees, and that alone took us 6 months to work through the kinks, which is why I say this is not an effort for Al or for one person, for Dave. It's an effort for this whole room, because if you subscribe to the notion that this is a team sport, that this is a collective effort for the good of corporations, but a good of society everywhere, then it stands to reason that we should be working together on how to turbocharge, how to make these efforts come together more rapidly. In a conventional setting, I would just want to remind people that because I'm such a believer in culture, I would say the most valuable bit of data in that side is open reporting data, the extent to which employees are reporting to you the issues that they come across in their daily work, and understanding the reasons that they may not be reporting are just as critical as getting those inputs. So it's a collection for me of the cultural data plus the systems data that starts to give you the insights that you need. But it's a lot of hard work. You just have to dig into it.
GE is not alone in having data in disparate locations. We have the same challenge at Microsoft, and GE is a conglomerate, right? And Microsoft much less so, and yet we still have that challenge. And that was really driven home to us when we began to get ready to comply next month with the European General Data Protection Regulation. And so, you were mainly talking about employee data, but we also have data on hundreds of millions of people using Windows and Office and Bing and other things, and they have rights under the European data protection law. And for us to be able to just track where is all that data and enable people to delete it or control it, or see it, has required an engineering project of hundreds of engineers, actually, to knit all those systems together. And it's work that's just sort of coming to fruition now. But it does underscore the point about the basis of all AI is having the right data to answer the question that you want to answer.
But if you can show that you can take the figurative piano off the foot of 10 employees, really change the way that they work, change their working life in a positive way, people get excited then about helping you with the effort of making sure your data set is complete. That's the kind of tipping point that we're trying to drive at. The fact that, hey, we can dispense with a lot of these low value add or lower value add compliance tasks and actually make your job richer and more interesting. If you can demonstrate that, then people will help you with the data effort. It's just getting to that point is a challenge.
Well, and let me pick up on that. So this is expensive, right? You've all referred to the fact this is a large undertaking. How do you measure a return on investment? I really like what you just said about if you can show somebody why this benefits them, then maybe they'll step forward and help you get to that finish line. Starting with Gail, how are companies measuring their return on investment? I imagine when you're Intel with your product, you have to show them why it's worth their time to buy the product. And so how are they measuring that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the data side of this is a big part of the answer. So, in one of our banking customers, more than 50 data sources are used, 50 applications are used that have customer data in them, and so the question is, how do you merge all of that together? And what happens in many cases is data is moved many times as well in these journeys. So not only are there 50 applications and 50 potential systems of record for the data, but they may have been stored 5 to 10 times somewhere through the infrastructure. So just controlling that alone is a challenge. Then the next question is, how do you unify information from those systems such that you can leverage all of the knowledge you have to make better decisions? And one is creating data lakes. A second approach is really creating an entity view of what's in the data so that we start learning about the individual people, places, organizations, and things, if you will, in the data. Which is an approach that we take, so more of an entity analytics, knowledge graph orientation to it, so that the data doesn't have to be moved, but you can in fact create a knowledge layer over it and go point back to the original data. But this is the first problem. If you can't solve that problem, then we really can't get to realizing the potential of AI. So all of us, all I think industry leaders are focused down on this problem. And we are working on tools that help our customers extract learning, extract knowledge from these data sources as fast as we can, in which they can gain access to the insights that lie within much quicker. So the ROI question then comes back to what problems are we trying to solve? And I think generally there are three or four major areas where AI is being deployed today. One of them is in customer service, customer recommendations, right? Might be next best action to serve a customer. The second area is in operational excellence. So how do we keep our planes flying and off the ground, ships, rolling through the seas, and our products with high quality rolling into the marketplace. So those are more operational efficiency areas, and we work in all of those. A fourth one might be, how do we embed AI in new products or in new capabilities? And a good example of that is what we see in the intelligent agent frameworks coming out through Alexa and Siri and many others. And then fourth is new products altogether. So how do we extract insights from data in which we can build new businesses? And both GE and Microsoft have been doing this, right? So these are new businesses. So those are the four principal areas in which value can be derived. Where customers seem to be implementing most today would be on the first two, or possibly the fourth. The fifth we're seeing as well, but where I think my team spends most of its time, not Intel in general, but the Saffron team within Intel spends most of its time is on 1 and 2. And we have also, working with our customers, we have two different approaches. One would be an early adopter model. We have a construct of a problem we're going to solve. We often use our colleagues at Intel, inside Intel, as a laboratory to actually implement this first, and then we'll take that idea to some of our core customers and talk with them, and that's sort of an early adopter model. And the ROI associated with an early adopter model is, and that's pretty much where the industry is in my brain today, is where we are in the adoption cycles, is that there's a shared exchange of value. We're exchanging technology and possibly the acceleration of an operational tempo for decision making, and the customer is getting the benefit of participating in defining how that's going to be done. It's a classic early adopter model. Then there are, in some things that we're doing that are very special, we do what would be first customer co-creation models, where we're actually tackling a big problem together that's not been solved at all, and we're identifying how to solve that problem. And we see that in a couple of industries underway. So with that, in each of those cases, there are clear, we work with our customers to identify where's the value to you, how will we measure it, and how will we know we're successful. And without that, we don't even start a project, because it's a science project instead of a useful implementation of technology. And the ROI would be, in AML, is reducing false positives. So we can reduce, this is a huge challenge requiring more and more investigators into the AML organizations. But if we can reduce the amount of false positives and focus in the analysis on the right things, then we can make the time limits that are imposed upon our people. We can reduce the exposure to fines that are levied in the billions of dollars, and so ROI is measured right there, right in the core of those two issues.
Great, thank you. Let's see if anyone in the audience has any questions. I have a lot more questions, so I'll give people a couple.
Should we ask the audience some questions?
All right, let's jump into. I think for this conference, one of the more interesting areas is the ethics behind artificial intelligence. And Dave, I'm going to start down with you. There are a lot of people talking about the bias of. I mean, we're imperfect as people, and if we create this artificial intelligence, how do we make it? And this leads to probably our final topic of people on their jobs interacting with artificial intelligence, but how do we make it so that hopefully it's improving upon our bias and it's not just giving us biased results?
So there is this promise that, like as a subset of AI helping us make better decisions, it can help us make more fair decisions. Computers don't have the kinds of biases that we have around race and gender and other categories because they're just machines with zeros and ones. And so the possibility is there that they can help us make more fair decisions. In practice, though, this actually becomes a challenge for a couple different reasons. One is that, again, AI being all based on data, if the data set used to train an AI system is not representative of society at large, then neither will the results be. There was an example of this in the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago about facial recognition software. And it was actually software from Microsoft and IBM and Facebook and others. And what it showed was that the ability to look at a face and just predict, is it male or female, was highly accurate for white men. And at the other end of the spectrum, pretty inaccurate for dark-skinned women. And the reason is the training data. The data that's available to companies, and you need hundreds of thousands of images, tends to be like, Fortune 500 CEOs and legislators and things like that. So there's lots of images of white men. And so the system worked well on white men. So that's one challenge. Do you have representative data? Then this other challenge is actually a bigger challenge, which is you might have representative data, but to the extent the data is accurate about the world in which we live, and if the world in which we live is infected with institutional, structural racism, sexism, et cetera, that will be reflected in the data. And then you can have a system where the artificial intelligence system learns in the language of AI, racism, sexism, et cetera. For instance, AI systems are often trained just by reading large bodies of text. And so if an AI system is learning about, say, hiring algorithms, and it looks at a lot of text, it sees that the pronoun he appears close to the word doctor in many sentences, and the pronoun she shows up very close to nurse, and this can be mathematically measured. Then the computer is essentially learning, but it doesn't know anything. Again, it's just numbers, it's just correlations. It's learning that doctors are usually men and nurses are usually women. And then it could sort of recommend more men to be doctors and women to be nurses, and thereby perpetuate a system we already have, which could be counter to the results you want. And so there's a variety of techniques that we can apply to be sensitive to those kinds of concerns and enable us to build systems that actually are fair and that can help us overcome the biases of the past.
Do either of you have anything to follow up with on that?
I would say our promise to employees is consistent with our code of conduct, which is that we are going to be fair, we're going to be honest, and we're going to be trustworthy. And as compliance professionals, as integrity leaders, we have to, all of us, recognize that while AI can help, there is a potential issue with the ways in which it can undermine employee trust in our program. I came back from a trip a month ago. I put all my receipts into a system, and I thought, isn't this cool? It goes into a system, my administrator gets them, and then she said to me upon arriving in the office, hey, you had French fries and onion rings in the same. So I said, oh, Brussels sprouts were out. But I have to say, I felt a little exposed, right? How did you know that was the first question I had? And believe me, the employees who are on the receiving end of this helpful technology are going to have the same concern initially, which is that Big Brother is watching. And is this a game of gotcha? Are you going to be policing every little thing that I do such that work is not enjoyable any longer? And it is hard to configure and to shape a strategy. It's important to shape a strategy that initially, at least, constructs this effort as something that you're doing with the employee and prioritizing those areas that help the employee with challenges like too much work, not enough time. Want to be compliant, but don't have enough visibility to the data in order to be compliant. The more that compliance can be helpful to employees, the more we can fulfill our ethical commitment and ensure that we don't undo decades of work, hundreds of hours of work that we've done to build trust and motivation. If we lose trust and motivation, I don't want AI. Those things are much more important to me.
I agree with that. So trustworthiness has to be fundamental to the systems we build. We believe that transparency and explainability are core to that. And one of the litmus tests we have on every design that we look at is at Saffron and Intel is, does it have those fundamentals? Are they present? It could be most minimum viable product, 0.5. It has to have that at its core. And so that's how we began building trustworthiness. Data is really hard, as we know. We work with hybrid data sources, structured and text and sensor, and lots of different data sources all coming together. Machine learning tools being used to derive some of the knowledge we get from those data sources. It's complex. And so my advice for all of us is really examine the trustworthiness of the systems that you're using. And then let's all participate in defining this future of how we protect ourselves, right? So I think it's going to be interesting to see, regulatory actions taken on how certain algorithms are composed and the data they use and the attributes selected. We can expect that we're going to see some of that is already happening in Europe, starting to happen in Australia. We'll see that happen here eventually. And we can all have a voice and play a role in helping shape and form that. So we're not out of control. It's, our destiny is in our hands, so to speak.
There's three tech companies on stage, and so it's not surprising that all three of us are sort of bullish on AI and the benefits it can bring to society. But at the same time, it feels like, it's not a warm and fuzzy thing, right? I mean, it's all about numbers and calculations and, computers. And so it feels cold to a lot of people. It feels distant. Gail, as you're saying, it's not inherently transparent. And so people feel maybe a little suspicious. How are these decisions being made? And the machine somehow knows. In this case, it was your secretary, but it could have been a machine, knew you had, fries and onion rings the same day. And so like, wow, do we like this? And, do we really trust it? And since we do feel like it potentially is so beneficial in healthcare, in transportation, in agriculture, in other fields, we need to bend over backwards to really work through the set of ethical questions that arises. And it's not unique to AI. It's not like, oh, there's something bad about AI. All technological change raises, new sets of issues. So, we're very much working to connect sort of across the industry. We set up a group called the Partnership on AI, which is a group of about 50 tech companies and civil society groups. We're connecting with regulators, we're working with academics to try to bring in a broad range of views, because it's not something like tech companies can figure out on their own. A lot of the questions that arise, it's really like a societal question. How do you want this thing to work? And then tech companies can go build it this way, or they can go build it some other way. But it's really what way do you want?
Yeah, and Gail, you explained it to me when we were talking before the session. People have to understand where the data is coming from and what's happening to the data, and that it's not perfect, and this is what we're doing, and here's the result. So I thought that was very well spoken. So I think this leads us into the question on everybody's mind, which is the elephant in the room, right? What does this mean about people's jobs? What does it mean about the world that we live in? I have a 5-year-old who woke me up the other morning sobbing because we have Alexis in his room, or Alexa, and he was terrified because it keeps talking to him and it's asking him questions and it's listening to him. And I looked at him and I thought, that actually makes sense to me, because we're making technology into a person. We've put a person's voice on it. And so I think as you folks sit here and talk about AI, you're able to think of it as a tool that will help people do their jobs better. I think a lot of people see technology companies as humanizing the technology, and they feel threatened by it. And so, Dave, starting with you, if you could read the tea leaves in the room, since you're the policy guy, right? Where do you think we're headed?
Well, the effect on jobs is definitely one of the #1 issues. Our design philosophy is very much around building AI as a tool to help us be more productive, which is just sort of consistent with Microsoft's DNA going back to the beginning. With Windows and Office, it was all about, hey, software, put a computer on every desktop in every home, you could do great things. And the next step in that is AI. AI will change the nature of work, and it will eliminate some jobs, and it will create new jobs. One of the things we know, looking back, is that technology has always done that. So, we're riding these elevators up and down here at the Grand Hyatt. That used to be a job for somebody to control the elevators, and now through automation, we can just push the button and it's done. The thing we don't know is there something different about AI? In the past, technology always created new jobs, more than it eliminated. But is there something different in the nature of AI that actually will result in a net decrease? And on that question, predictions are kind of all over the map. Respected groups like McKinsey have come out with reports, and others saying, hey, 47% of jobs will be affected in some way, not necessarily eliminated, they could be changed. We don't know. What we do know is that we will need more training in the future for a workforce that's ready for the 21st century economy. Too many people today are being left behind with high school educations and that are not sufficient for a digital era. So we have to put a lot of focus on that, because whether or not there's a net reduction in the number of jobs, for sure, work will require more digital skills in the future.
And Al, I think this is related, but a little different. You talked about culture, and you touched on onion rings and French fries, which sometimes they come together in the same basket. But how can this help culture, right? I can very easily predict why I would feel threatened or annoyed if if you're reading my emails and I'm going to go have lunch with somebody, so you say, hey, before you have that lunch, let me communicate this with you specifically. It's very big brother. Mm-hmm. How can you use this to help culture, though, which I think you touched on before, that you can show somebody, maybe it's, you don't have to take this training, or here's the right training for you, or I'm saving you time.
Well, the #1 job in building a culture is engaging your leaders. If your leaders aren't engaged and committed to integrity, really committed, not just so-called tone at the top, but do they spend their time on it? Do they feel it in their bones? Do their employees believe that they care and prioritize this area? If you don't have that, you don't have anything. None of the other things that we're doing will have any impact whatsoever. However, this tool of providing data can help with the effort of getting your leaders engaged. Any compliance leader worth her salt will tell you that the meeting with their board or their leadership team goes 10 times better if you have data on any specific risk area. And so this can really help compliance engage leadership and then build build a program. I just want to say one last thing, which is, all of us can go to a compliance conference every day of the week, because there's an industry out there. But wouldn't it be wonderful if next year at this conference, Ethisphere and all of us working together could combine to solve one intractable problem? We could pick it together using these technological tools so that we're actually talking about progress in this area rather than taking notes. So it's a challenge to you and the great team at Ethisphere. We love you guys, that's why we're all here, but we can take this to the next level.
Okay. I accept that challenge on behalf of everybody. And Gail, do you have anything? We have 4 seconds left, so I think I was going to say.
Thank you. It's been terrific to be here. Remember, data is where we start. The algorithms, though, everything needs to be explained. The algorithms need to be explained, and the data sources and the information extracted from them and used by the algorithms needs to be explained. So it is a continuous loop. And then we have feedback loops and learning that's continuous in the process of using AI. So it's exciting, yes. It's helpful, yes. Jobs will change. But the jobs we're focused on today are helping humans. It's really about doing jobs that couldn't be done before, using massive amounts of data that was inaccessible to us as humans. We just couldn't see it all. So we're making some good progress, but as my colleagues have said, we have a way to go yet, and we're all, I think, heavily invested in making sure we get this right.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.